Hello everyone, welcome back. I'm Kris. We went back about 5 seconds before they get into John Mill. This is Mohamed sponsored this video, Misquoting Jesus in the Bible by Professor Bart D. And before we get started, there's a thanks button on the channel. You can donate. If you do and you request a video, you will also be thrown in the title that you'll see, your name sponsored. And subscribe if you'd like to. It does help. But so does the thumbs up. That helps me out a lot, according to YouTube. I don't understand it, but I'm supposed to tell you that. And video.
This John Mill was a scholar of the Bible, and he had spent 30 years looking at manuscripts of the New Testament. Now, this is obviously after the invention of printing, and printers have to decide what text they're going to print. And the problem is they've got manuscripts that have differences among them. And so how does a printer decide which manuscript to print? Well, it's a problem. That's when they started realizing that this was an issue. Well, John Mill wanted to produce a printed edition of the Greek New Testament. He spent 30 years looking at the manuscripts available to him. He had available to him 100 manuscripts, approximately 100 manuscripts. And he printed up his edition of the Greek New Testament in which he'd give a verse, and then at the bottom of the page, he would indicate the places where the manuscripts differed from one another for that verse. To the shock and dismay of many of his readers, when John Mill produced his edition of the Greek New Testament, it included an apparatus at the bottom of the page that cited 30,000 places where the manuscripts differed from one another. 30,000 places where there were manuscript variations among the manuscripts that he had discovered. And the striking thing is John Mill didn't give all of the differences he found. He only
took him 30 years to do all this. He found 30,000. So he found about, just to break it all down, he found 1,000 a year, which meant, did I just say which meant? I should be kicked in the teeth. So that meant that he found 2 to 3, less than 3 a day. After a while, you're kind of like, you're just like, okay, so which one of these that I'm about to print is correct? And once you get to probably about 100, and you're like, do you understand that, 2 to 3 a day, so that's, we'll say 75 in a month. You got to think, what am I doing here? Am I printing this, or am I going to try to correct this? Because you can't correct it. There's too many mistakes. If it was like one mistake, then you could start to look at it and say, okay, well, we'll try to funnel it out. 2, 3, 10. But when he hit 75 after a month, he's like, yeah, I don't know. That's 1,000 a month. Wait a minute. Did I just lose track of where I was at? That's 1,000 a year. Okay, yeah, he's got to wonder how many. What did the original book look like?
only cited the differences that he thought were significant. Some of his detractors claimed that John Mill was working to render the text of Scripture uncertain. His supporters pointed out that he didn't create these differences. He simply noticed that they exist. So what do we know today about the numbers of mistakes in our manuscripts? Well, Mill looked at 100 manuscripts, and now we have 5,700 manuscripts. Nobody knows how many differences there are among the manuscripts that we now have, because nobody yet, even with the development of computer technologies, nobody has been able to add up all of the differences. Sometimes scholars guess there may be a couple 100,000 differences. Some people say 300,000, some say 400,000. There are different guesses. The way I usually put it to my students is in comparative terms.
Different guesses. That's what got everyone into this problem to begin with. Guessing. The translation just guessing what they thought this person said. And I didn't realize, or I didn't pay attention, 5,700 New Testaments today. And he only looked through 100 that were available to him at his time 300 years ago. And he found 30,000 discrepancies. Oh my goodness.
There are more differences in our manuscripts than there are words in the New Testament. More different.
I was going to say there's more differences than there probably is likenesses at this point.
In our manuscripts than there are words in the New Testament. Well, this obviously creates a problem. If you want to know what Mark actually said, and all you've got are copies of Mark that are hundreds of years later that have so many differences in them, how can you possibly reconstruct it? Well, that is a problem. Now, having said that we have these hundreds of thousands of differences, I want to emphasize a particular point, which is most of these differences that we have in our manuscripts are completely insignificant, unimportant, and don't matter for a thing. Many of these differences in the manuscripts are so unimportant that you can't replicate them in translation. Okay? In other words, like they changed the word order in Greek, where you would have to translate it the same way no matter what the Greek word order is. So, I mean, it doesn't really matter very much. By far, the vast majority of these hundreds of thousands of differences are significant for nothing more than showing that scribes in antiquity could spell no better than my students can today. And scribes, of course, didn't have spell check. Scribes, in fact, didn't even have dictionaries. And many scribes didn't care how they spelled anything. Sometimes you'll be reading a manuscript and there'll be the same word that occurs, say, 3 times within a couple of lines, and the scribe will spell the same word 3 different ways. He just doesn't care how the word is spelled. Well, so, you know, you've got lots and lots of those kinds of changes, and what do they matter for? They don't matter at all. So, having said there are all these hundreds of thousands of differences, I want to stress that most of them don't matter for very much. Some of these changes, the ones that don't matter, basically are accidental mistakes. Scribes were sometimes tired or sleepy, sometimes they were distracted, sometimes they were inept or unqualified, and they made mistakes. They would leave out a word, they'd leave out a verse, sometimes they'd leave out a page. They just made mistakes sometimes. One of the common mistakes of scribes is actually kind of interesting.
I wonder if they were getting paid to just finish the book. And maybe you can't read this translation, so they're just finishing this book. And if they, oh look, I skipped a page on accident, they'll never know. And then just, you know, they got paid to just do it, just get it done, whatever that means. And then of course you're looking at it and you're like, okay, I got a question. The book in question was like this big. And for some reason, I've got a book that is this big. Like, yeah, there was a lot of, a lot of translation difference. So I just made it quicker for you. Oh, okay, thanks.
Sometimes, you know, in the New Testament, you'll have a saying where you'll have 2 lines that end with the same words. Like Jesus in Luke chapter 12 says that whoever confesses me before people will be confessed before the angels of heaven, and whoever denies me before people will be denied before the angels of heaven. So you've got 2 lines that end with the words before the angels of heaven. And what scribes sometimes would do is they'd copy down the words before the angels of heaven on the first occurrence, and then, you know, they'd copy it down, then their eye would go back to the page, and their eye would alight on the second occurrence of the same words. Thinking that that's what they had just copied, they'd go then to the next line and start copying there, and as a result, they would leave out the intervening line. See how that works? That kind of phenomenon is where your eye skips from one line to another. It's called parablepsis. Parablepsis. And when you have words that end a line in the same way, that's known as homoteleuton. So this kind of mistake is called parablepsis occasioned by homoteleuton.
Can somebody translate that into English for me? That'd be great.
It's on my final exam at Chapel Hill. Probably the most egregious mistake in any manuscript of the New Testament, one of my favorites, is in a manuscript that's manuscript 109. It's 109 because it's written on parchment and animal skin instead of papyrus, and it's the 109th manuscript that was cataloged. This is a 10th century manuscript that was written by a scribe who wasn't paying attention, and this scribe was copying the Gospel of Luke. Now, the Gospel of Luke is one of the two Gospels in the New Testament that has a genealogy of Jesus. Genealogies usually aren't the favorite reading of my students at Chapel Hill. And I think probably it wasn't the favorite reading of this guy because he wasn't really paying attention to what he was doing. But, in Luke's genealogy is actually fairly interesting because in Matthew's the other gospel that gives a genealogy of Jesus, and it traces Jesus' line all the way back to Abraham, the father of the Jews, in Matthew. Luke doesn't stop there. Luke keeps going. Luke traces Jesus' genealogy all the way back to Adam, as in Adam and Eve. This is a fantastic genealogy. I've got an aunt who's a genealogist who's traced my family, back to the Mayflower. The Mayflower, Adam and Eve. So it's Jesus is supposedly the son of Joseph, who's the son of so and so, the son of so and so, the son of so and so, who's the son of David, son of Jesse, son of so and so. It goes all the way back. Isaac, son of Abraham, so back to Seth, son of Adam, who's the son of God. Okay, this genealogy goes all the way back. So the scribe of manuscript 109 is copying a manuscript that evidently gave the genealogy in two columns.
What if I was able to do that? I can. Me. My dad John. His dad Chuck. 2 or 3 people. Adam. Boom.
2 columns. But the second column didn't go to the bottom of the page. It only went part way down, the second column. So the first column, second column, part way down. And the scribe apparently didn't realize that this genealogy was in 2 columns. And so he copied across the columns instead of copying one column then the other column, leading to some very interesting results. As it turns out, Adam isn't the first human being. There was a man named Phares, who's the father of the human race. And as it turns out, God is the son of Ehrman. So it happens. These kinds of mistakes are just pure accidental mistakes that scribes mess up in places. There are other kinds of mistakes that are what I think are probably intentional mistakes. I differentiate between accidental mistakes where scribes just slip up and intentional mistakes where it looks like scribes are actually trying to change the text. Now, I don't know for sure that scribes are trying to change the text. I don't have any scribes around to interrogate about the matter. But there are some changes that don't look like they could possibly simply be a slip of the pen. And there are others that are debatable, whether they were a slip of the pen or not. But let me give you a couple of examples, and you'll see that some of these look like scribes maybe wanted to change the text. I'll give you a couple for instances. In Mark chapter 1, the Gospel of Mark, we read at the very beginning that we read, as was written in Isaiah the prophet, behold, I send my messenger before your face to prepare your way for you. Okay, this is in Isaiah the prophet, behold, I send my messenger before you. This is a very interesting passage because the passage that's quoted is not Isaiah. When it says in Isaiah the prophet and then gives the quotation, the passage quoted is actually Exodus. So it's interesting that in the later manuscripts of Mark's gospel, the text is changed. So that it no longer says in Isaiah, as is written in Isaiah the prophet. Now it says, as is written in the prophets. You see, getting rid of the problem that, in fact, this isn't a quotation from Isaiah. Right? See, so maybe that's a slip of the pen, but it looks to me like somebody saw that this could be taken as a mistake, and they changed it as a result. Or give you a second example. In Luke's Gospel, chapter 2, we have the only story of Jesus as a boy in the New Testament. Jesus is a 12-year-old, and we're told that he and his family have taken a trip to Jerusalem to celebrate a festival, probably the Passover festival. It is a peculiar story because they celebrate this festival, and then the family goes back in the caravan back home, and 3 days later they realize Jesus isn't with them. I mean, you might think they would have checked ahead of time, but he's not there, and so they go back to Jerusalem to try.
Was this the plot for Home Alone?
And find him, and on the third day his mother finds him in the temple. And this isn't an accident, by the way, that it's on the third day, right? This is a foreshadowing for Luke of what's going to happen at the resurrection narrative, where on the third day Jesus will rise from the dead. Well, so on the third day, his mother finds him in the temple, and there's 12-year-old Jesus talking to the leaders of the Jews and discussing with them matters of the law. And Mary is not pleased, and she sees Jesus finally after tracking him down for 3 days, and she says, "Son, why have you done this? Your father and I have been looking all over for you." Now, when scribes copied this, they were taken aback. Your father and I? But Joseph wasn't his father, right? Jesus was born of a virgin. So it doesn't make sense for Mary to say, "Your father and I have been looking all over for you." And so there are changes in the manuscripts. Some manuscripts simply say, "Joseph and I have been looking all over for you." Some manuscripts say, "We have been looking all over for you." But somebody's changing the text because it could be read as a problem. And so they got rid of the problem. I'll give you a third example. This example is in one of Jesus' discourses in the New Testament, in Matthew chapter 24, in which Jesus is talking about what's going to happen at the end of time. This passage actually was very important. I feel a tangent coming on here, by the way. This passage was very important when I moved to Chapel Hill in 1988. Bob, you had been gone for a year at this time. In 1988, there was a big furor in North Carolina. There were Christian groups who thought that the end of the world was going to happen in 1988. That Jesus was going to come back and take everybody out of the world who were his followers. That's the rapture, right? When the rapture, and Jesus comes back, takes people out of the world, and then all hell breaks out on earth for 7 years, and then the end comes, right? So there was a guy who had written a book based on this passage I'm going to talk about in a second. A guy had written this book that was called 88 Reasons.
One of my aunts became super religious. I've talked about this before, after my uncle died. And she had a bumper sticker on her on her vehicle that said, "When the rapture comes, this vehicle will be empty," or something like that. And I first saw it, we were at the airport. And I said to my aunt, like, "What does that mean?" My other aunt, "What does that mean?" And she told me. And I was like, "Oh, okay." So we were picking somebody up, and we went back to eat at my aunt's house. And my super religious aunt was sitting there, and something got brought up about, I don't remember what it was about. I just don't remember what the topic was. I was like 8. And no, I wasn't 8. I was 13 or 14 maybe. I don't even remember the time. I just vividly remember the bumper sticker. Anyways, I was like 14 then. And I don't remember what was being discussed, but my aunt just goes, "Oh, I just can't take it. Lord, end this civilization now and take me up to heaven." And I'm just sitting there, and she says that, and I like look over at her, and then I look over at my other aunt. My other aunt was just like, and everyone in the room was looking at it. It was super uncomfortable, like, "Oh, just please kill off the world and take me." And we were like, "Yeah, pretty sure that's a good Christian thing to say right now." "Please, I want all these people to die and burn in hell forever, but you're going to take me." It was just like, what the hell?
Reasons why the rapture will occur in 1988. This book was in 2 million copies. I had students whose parents believed it and literally sold the farm. They thought that Jesus was going to come back in 1988. And so I just showed up in North Carolina kind of blissfully ignorant of these things. And I moved from New Jersey where such things we're not worried about. And but this guy named Edgar Whisenant, he was a NASA engineer who had studied the Bible and come up with 88 reasons why the rapture is going to occur in 1988. And one of the reasons involves this passage I'm going to talk about. Jesus tells this the disciples want to know, when's the end going to come? And Jesus tells them, learn the parable of the fig tree. When the fig tree puts forth its leaves, you know that summer is near. So too, when these things take place, you know that the end is near. Truly I tell you, this generation will not pass away before all these things take place. So Edgar Whisenant, this is one of Edgar Whisenant's 88 reasons. So the way it works is this. What is Israel in the Bible? Israel is sometimes represented as a fig tree. Well, when the fig tree puts forth its leaves, you know that the end is near. Well, okay, so if the fig tree is Israel, when does the fig tree put forth its leaves? Well, the fig tree lies dormant over the winter, and then when springtime comes, it comes back to life. When does Israel come back to life? 1948. That's when Israel comes back to life, becomes a nation again. Truly I tell you, this generation will not pass away before all these things take place. How long is a generation in the Bible? 40 years. 1948 plus 40, bingo, 1988. This was one of the 88 reasons. Now, somebody pointed out to Edgar Whisenant that Jesus in the same passage points out that no one knows the day or the hour when the end will come. When Whisenant had said that it was going to come during the week of Rosh Hashanah in September. And so they said, but Jesus says no one knows the day or the hour. And Whisenant was completely unfazed. He said, I don't know the day or the hour. I just know the week. All right, so this passage actually throughout Christian history has been important because people have always been trying to figure out when the end's going to come. So in this passage, Jesus says no one knows the day or the hour, not the angels of heaven, nor even the Son, but the Father alone. Okay, Matthew 24:36. Scribes copying that found it to be a peculiar thing to say, though. Not even the Son knows when the end is going to come? I mean, surely the Son of God is all-knowing. Isn't he omniscient? And so how do scribes deal with the problem? They deal with the problem by getting rid of the phrase. And so in later manuscripts, the phrase, not even the Son, is taken out, so that now Jesus doesn't claim to be ignorant about when the end is going to come. So that strikes me as probably an intentional sort of change.
We're going to go ahead and end it here for part 2, and we'll come back for part 3. Yeah. It's interesting. All right. We'll be back shortly for part 3. Well, it'll be for tomorrow for you, but shortly for me. But until part 3, you have a good day, have a good night.